I woke up with a strange burning sensation on my scalp, like ice and fire pressed together. For a moment, I thought it was just another nightmare from the restless night before, until my hand brushed the pillow, and instead of strands of hair, I felt nothing but raw, naked skin. My fingers slid again and again over the smoothness, disbelieving until the truth landed with the weight of a stone. My hair was gone. My crown, my pride, every silver strand I had cared for like a treasure shaved away while I slept. My breath caught, and I sat up so fast the sheets tangled around me. That was when I saw it. A folded note pinned neatly to the linen right where my head had rested. The handwriting was sharp, deliberate, each letter cruelly elegant. Today you'll finally look like what you are, an old woman unfit to rule. Consider this my gift. Signed, your loving daughter-in-law. I held the paper, as if it might cut me, the words, blurring through the rush of blood in my eyes. My heart hammered against my ribs, not with fear, but with a humiliation so deep it hollowed my chest. Today was not an ordinary day. Today was the day I was scheduled to announce my will. For months, the family had whispered, speculated, envied every cousin and nephew, waiting to see how the fortune my husband and I had built, brick by brick, would be divided. And my son's wife, my own daughter-in-law, had chosen this morning to scalp me like a prisoner of war and leave me a taunt on paper, daring me to show my face in front of everyone, stripped of dignity. I stood and staggered to the mirror, the marble floor cold under my bare feet. The woman staring back was not the matriarch of a vast estate. She was a figure of ridicule, scalp red, and raw eyes wide with shock. I pressed trembling fingers to the glass as if I could reach through and pull the old me back. The shame was unbearable. For decades I had carried myself with grace, my silver hair a symbol of endurance, and elegance admired at every gala and business dinner. And now, in the most public moment of my life, they wanted me reduced to a spectacle, a senile old crone, unworthy of respect. I bit my lip until it bled to hold back the scream clawing at my throat. But inside my chest, another voice whispered, "No." Not like this. They wanted me to collapse, to hide, to walk into that room broken. If I gave them that satisfaction, they would not only take my pride, but also my legacy. My hand slid to the locked drawer in my desk, where the documents waited, the carefully prepared will that I was supposed to present today. Millions in property businesses, accounts, investments, every decision I had made with my late husband to ensure our family's future. I had been ready to divide it generously to keep peace, to protect bonds. But the paper crinkled in my other hand with its venomous message, and I realized the gift I had prepared might become my own noose. As I stood there, scalp stinging, heart pounding, a single question tore through me like lightning. How far would you go if your own family tried to erase you? Would you bow your head and let them bury you alive? Or would you fight back even if it meant destroying the very people you once loved most? Tell me in the comments, press 1, if you believe I must strike back or hit, like if you think silence is the safer path. I pressed the note flat against the dresser and read it again, each word a challenge, a declaration of war. Today they thought they had won. Today they expected me to appear in front of relatives, lawyers, and witnesses, humiliated, stripped, discredited, and then quietly hand over the keys to the kingdom. They believed I would accept the role of a weak, fading matriarch, too frightened to resist. They had no idea the storm they had awakened. My scalp burned, but the fire inside me burned hotter. This was no longer about wealth. This was about dignity, about the right to stand and be seen as who I truly am, not as the caricature they wanted to parade. So here I am speaking to you before the day unfolds. If you were in my place, what would you do? Would you expose the betrayal even if it shattered your family? Would you cling to peace even as it strangled you? I don't know how this day will end, but I do know one thing with a certainty sharper than any blade. I will not walk into that hall the victim of their cruelty. If they want war, they will get it. And when it's over, The only ones humiliated will be them. When I forced myself to leave the mirror, my knees almost buckled, but not from weakness. It was the rush of realization, the sudden clarity that this wasn't some childish prank or an outburst of cruelty done in the heat of a moment. No, what had been done to me required planning. The shaved scalp was just the visible wound. The real weapon had been set in motion much earlier. I sat down at the edge of the bed and tried to remember last night. The memory replayed itself slowly. I had stayed up late in my study reviewing the old will one last time, flipping through the pages where every number, every property, every clause had been crafted with care. I had even placed the signed copy into the safe ready for the lawyer to bring it to the family meeting today. I remember pouring myself a glass of water before bed. Ordinary, nothing suspicious. And yet now, thinking back, I remembered the heaviness that hit me the moment I lay down. I had always been a light sleeper, but last night my body sank into the mattress as though pulled into the dark by invisible chains. I remembered trying to open my eyes once in the middle of the night, hearing faint footsteps in the hallway, but I couldn't move. My limbs refused to respond as if drugged. My hand curled tight on the bedsheet. They had done it deliberately. Someone had slipped something into that glass, something to paralyze me, just enough not to kill, but to make sure I stayed unconscious while they humiliated me. It wasn't just the shaved scalp, it was the premeditation. They had planned it, and the one who left the note had signed it, clearly my daughter-in-law. I staggered to the kitchen, opened the cabinet where the glasses were kept, and picked up the tumbler I had used last night. At the bottom of the glass there was a faint residue, a thin, cloudy film that shouldn't have been there. I touched it with a fingertip, rubbed it against my thumb. It smelled faintly bitter. My chest tightened. A sedative, most likely. That explained why I hadn't woken up while the razor carved away my hair. The insult was obvious. They wanted me to appear at the D-Chuk announcement looking unhinged, unstable. An old woman embarrassed to the point of madness. And once the whispers spread among the relatives, she looks sick, she's losing it. She's not fit to manage anything. It would be easy for them to suggest I was no longer competent, that the will should be revised, that guardianship should pass to my son and his wife. I pressed both hands on the counter to steady myself, fighting the tremor in my arms. Betrayal has a unique weight. It doesn't just wound you, it hollows out the ground you stand on. All at once, the years of small remarks, the veiled insults, the staged concerns clicked into place like puzzle pieces. Flashback 3 months ago at a dinner, she had leaned across the table with a syrupy smile and said, "Mother, you keep forgetting your keys lately. Maybe you should let us handle the house. It's safer that way." The table had gone silent and I had laughed it off, forcing a smile, but her eyes had glistened with something far from concern. Flashback again last month when I misplaced a document. She patted my hand like a nurse comforting a patient and said, "Don't worry soon. You won't have to handle these complicated papers anymore." My son had nodded, distracted, not noticing the dagger behind her tone. And just last week she had whispered to him in the hall, thinking I was too far to hear. "All we need is one clear sign she's not in control, and everything will be settled." My son didn't protest. He didn't defend me. He simply sighed and said, "I'll trust you to handle it." I had convinced myself it was just idle talk, youthful arrogance. But now, touching the raw skin of my scalp, I knew it had all been preparation. They wanted me to fall apart in front of witnesses so the lawyer would have no choice but to declare me unfit. Then the wealth, the empire, everything Robert and I had built, would pass neatly into their hands. I walked back to the bedroom, opened the safe, and stared at the neat envelope inside. The will. My husband's voice echoed in my head, a memory from years ago when he was still alive and strong. "Never let them corner you, Margaret. Money doesn't just test strangers, it tests blood." I had laughed then, thinking he was too cynical. But standing there, scalp stinging, I realized he had been warning me all along. I pressed the safe closed again, the metallic click sharp in the silence. For the first time in my life, I doubted not just my daughter-in-law, but my own son. Was he in on it? Had he allowed this to happen under his roof? The thought clawed at me, tore through me. A mother never wants to believe her child capable of betrayal, but the footprints from last night, the casual dismissal of my dignity, the silence at every insult they pointed to his complicity. My hand tightened around the note until the paper crumpled. Unfit to rule, she had written. They wanted me erased not just as a matriarch, but as a person. I sat on the bed again, breath-ragged, staring out the window where the morning light began to pierce the curtains. The world outside went on, neighbors walking their dogs, children rushing to school, oblivious to the war igniting inside this house. So I ask you now, if you woke to find yourself shaved, drugged, and mocked by the very people you fed, raised, and trusted, what would you do? Would you hand over your power quietly, telling yourself it's better to avoid conflict, or would you fight even knowing it might destroy your family? Comment 1 if you believe I should confront them head-on or press, like if you think I should endure in silence. As I stared at my reflection once more, the shame had not lessened, but alongside it, something else stirred. Anger. Pure, unflinching anger, the kind that doesn't flare and fade, but settles deep, like embers waiting for air. They thought they had weakened me. They didn't know they had awakened me. I thought I could bury the note in a drawer and wait until the meeting to confront them, but the more I paced the house, the more the walls themselves seemed to whisper their secrets. Every corner carried an echo of suspicion, every picture frame on the wall, a silent witness. I kept replaying last night in my head the heaviness after that glass of water, the muted steps in the hall, the sense of being watched, even as my body refused to wake. That kind of cruelty doesn't sprout overnight. It grows in the dark, watered by weeks, maybe months of planning. Just before noon, when the sun threw a pale glow across the dining table, the phone rang. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. My hands were still trembling, my voice still raw, but instinct told me to pick up. It was Helena, my oldest friend, the woman who had lived next door for over 30 years. Her voice was hesitant at first, but then it sharpened with urgency. "Margaret," she said, "I wasn't sure if I should call you, but I can't keep quiet anymore." Her words made my spine stiffen. I pressed the receiver tighter against my ear. "What is it, Helena?" She paused, then continued, her tone heavy. "I saw your daughter-in-law at the medical center last week. She wasn't there for herself. She was asking questions. Questions about you, about what it takes to have someone declared incompetent, about guardianship laws. I didn't want to believe it, but she was very specific. She mentioned your name." The breath caught in my throat. My fingers clutched the edge of the table until my knuckles whitened. So it was true. They weren't just humiliating me. They were laying the legal groundwork to strip me of every right I had left. Helena's voice softened. "I didn't know if I should tell you. I thought maybe it was just a misunderstanding. But the way she was smiling, the way she leaned close to the nurse, I knew it wasn't innocent. Margaret, you need to be careful." I closed my eyes, waves of betrayal slamming into me. "Thank you, Helena," I whispered, my voice cracking. "You were right to tell me." When I hung up, I sat frozen, my hand still resting on the receiver. The truth was now undeniable. The shaved head was the spectacle, the note, the declaration, but this was the foundation of the trap. They were painting me as unstable grooming doctors and lawyers to see me as a fragile old woman who had lost her grip. If they succeeded, my signature on any document would be worthless, my decisions overridden, my life handed to the very people who despised me. I stood and walked through the hallway, my bare scalp prickling under the draft. Every insult, every laugh disguised as advice, every time my son looked away while she mocked me, it all replayed in merciless detail. I remembered the night she brought pamphlets to dinner, sliding them across the table with glossy photos of senior residences. She said it was just for me to consider, but her eyes gleamed like a realtor closing a deal. I had pushed them aside, telling her I wasn't ready for such a place. She had smiled too sweet and murmured, "Soon you'll see it's best for everyone." Now I understood. The apartment in that brochure wasn't meant to be a gift. It was meant to be my cage, while she and my son took the house, the business, the accounts. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window. Outside, the world was calm, a boy riding his bike, a couple walking hand in hand. I wondered how many of them were living with the same betrayal under their roofs, smiling in public while daggers pressed against their backs. That afternoon, as if fate wanted to twist the knife deeper, another call came, this time from Dr. Myers, our longtime family physician. His voice was kind, but beneath it, I heard unease. "Margaret, I need to let you know something," he said carefully. "Your daughter-in-law came to see me. She asked me to write a statement about your health. She suggested you've been forgetful, disoriented. She even mentioned paranoia. She said she was concerned for your safety. She wanted me to sign a document recommending further evaluation." My chest burned as if the air had turned to acid. "And did you?" I demanded. "Of course not," he said firmly. "I told her I've known you for decades, and aside from normal fatigue, you're as sharp as ever. But Margaret, be warned. She's trying to build a case. I thought you should hear it from me before she finds someone less scrupulous." I thanked him, my voice steadier than I felt. When I hung up, my hands shook violently and I gripped the armrest to anchor myself. So now it was clear she was crafting a narrative piece by piece. The shaved scalp would be the image. The whispers to relatives would be the chorus. The fabricated medical concern would be the signature. Together they would weave a picture of a woman too old, too unstable to be trusted with her own legacy. I thought of Robert again, his voice echoing from the past. He had always warned me greed doesn't come with horns and a tail. It comes with smiles and family ties. I used to dismiss him as too wary, too cautious. Now I wished I had listened harder. I walked to the study, pulled open the heavy curtains, and let the light flood in. Dust danced in the beams, glittering like ghosts of the past. On the desk lay the old photographs of Robert and me at the groundbreaking of our first property, my hands still stained with paint from renovating apartments. We had built everything from nothing, clawed our way from the bottom with sweat and sleepless nights. And now a woman who had married into the family only a few years ago wanted to erase all of it with a smear campaign. I lifted one of the photos, staring at the younger version of myself, strong and determined hair, pinned back eyes fierce. That woman still lived in me. The mirror might show a shaven scalp, but it could not erase the fire of survival. I paced the room, my heart racing with every step. How long had my son known? Did he nod along to her plan because he truly believed I was slipping? Or because he wanted the convenience of power without the burden of gratitude? That thought hurt the most. A husband's betrayal you can explain. A friend's betrayal you can forgive. But a child turning his back on you, there is no language for that wound. I closed the curtains again, plunged the room into shadow, and whispered to myself, "They think I'm weak. They think they've won, but they don't know me." Before I ended the night, I left the light on at my desk and sat down with a fresh notebook. I needed to record everything, every insult, every whisper, every piece of evidence. If they wanted to drag me into the court of family opinion, then I would drag them into the court of truth. And so I ask you, listening now, what would you do if your own daughter-in-law tried to build a legal case to declare you incompetent? Would you stay silent to keep the family intact? Or would you fight and risk burning every bridge? Press 1 if you would fight for your dignity. Press like if you think peace is worth the price. The shadows in the room deepened, and I knew with certainty this wasn't just about inheritance anymore. This was about survival. By the next morning, the house no longer felt like mine. Every room seemed occupied by invisible intruders, every wall vibrating with the echo of voices that weren't mine. I had tried to tell myself the night before that I could endure this quietly, that perhaps I was imagining the worst. But Helena's warning and Dr. Myers' revelation had burned away any doubt. What I didn't expect was how quickly the pressure would tighten, how swiftly the lines of battle would be drawn. It began with my son's knock on the bedroom door. His voice carried a peculiar mixture of forced warmth and concealed irritation. "Mom, can we talk?" I hesitated before answering my hand, brushing the tender scalp hidden beneath a silk scarf. When I opened the door, he stood there with his wife just a step behind him, her eyes glittering with a confidence that made my stomach churn. "Mom," he said softly, "we're worried about you." He reached for my arm in a way that seemed gentle, but the pressure of his fingers was firm, steering me toward the living room as though I couldn't walk on my own. I sat on the sofa, my back rigid. She perched beside him with the posture of a queen about to address a subject. "You've been under so much stress," she began, her voice dripping with counterfeit sweetness. "And yesterday, well, everyone noticed you looked a little unstable." Her glance flicked deliberately to the scarf on my head. The insult was subtle, but sharp enough to slice. My son cleared his throat. "We think it might be time to reconsider your responsibilities. Maybe step back from certain decisions. The will, the properties, the finances, they can be overwhelming." He avoided my gaze, looking instead at his wife, as if waiting for her approval. My chest tightened. I stared at the boy I had once carried in my arms, the child who had once whispered, "Don't leave me in the dark," after his father died. Now he spoke like a stranger, rehearsed, detached. My lips trembled, but I forced my voice steady. "Is that what you truly believe, Michael? Or is that what she told you to say?" His jaw tightened. He glanced at her and she offered a faint smile, a smile that belonged not in a family but in a courtroom. "We're only trying to help," she said smoothly. "No one wants to see you embarrassed. Imagine standing in front of all those relatives, the lawyers, the press, looking confused. People might start asking if you're capable of making sound judgments. We just want to protect you from that." The words burrowed under my skin. Protect me. The same phrase they had repeated in different ways for months. Protect me from driving, from handling accounts, from remembering where I placed documents. Protect me until I had nothing left to protect. "I don't need protection," I whispered, but my son's eyes slid away as though even hearing me was too heavy a burden. They launched into a chorus of concern voices, overlapping rehearsed phrases delivered with the precision of actors who had memorized their lines. "Mom, you've been forgetting things. Mom, you've been stressed. Mom, you looked disoriented the other night." Every sentence another stone laid on my chest. They painted me as frail, as broken, until even I felt the temptation to doubt myself. My hands clenched on my knees. For a moment, I feared I might collapse under the weight of it. The room blurred, their voices droned, and I was pulled into memory. Flashback the nights after Robert's death, when bills piled high and I had no idea how to run a business. I remembered sitting at this same table, my young son, asleep upstairs and teaching myself numbers by the light of a single lamp. I remembered crying quietly into my hands, then straightening, wiping my tears, and continuing because failure wasn't an option. I blinked back to the present. My son was still talking words like daggers softened with a gentle tone. "We're not saying you're incapable, Mom, just that maybe it's time to let us handle things. For your sake. My sake." The phrase tasted like poison. I forced myself to stand. My knees trembled, but my voice was clear. "If you believe I'm too old to think, then prove it in front of everyone. Don't whisper in these walls. Say it at the table today when the lawyer is present." Her smile vanished for just a heartbeat replaced by a flicker of rage. Then it returned, wider, colder. "Of course," she said sweetly, "we'll see how it plays out." When they left, the silence in the house felt suffocating. I sat alone staring at the dust motes swirling in the sunlight and felt the weight of isolation pressing on me. They had already made their case to each other. How many others had they poisoned with their story? Cousins, aunts, friends. Would I walk into that hall today and see only pitying eyes, whispers of poor Margaret, she's lost her mind? The humiliation of the shaved scalp burned hotter. I tried to steady my breath, but my reflection in the glass cabinet caught me off guard. For a moment, I didn't recognize myself. My scarf slid slightly, revealing the rawness beneath, and I thought maybe they're right. Maybe I do look insane. The thought shook me to the core. My shoulders sagged. A dark temptation pressed in to give up, to sign over the documents quietly, to retreat into silence and let them win. It would be easier than fighting alone. The idea slithered through me like smoke, but then another memory rose fierce and unyielding. Flashback Robert standing with me at the ribbon cutting of our first building, his hand on mine as the scissors cut through red silk. "You're stronger than you think, Margaret," he had said, his eyes glinting with pride. "One day people will try to take what we've built. Don't let them, promise me." The echo of his voice lit a spark. My despair tightened into anger, anger into resolve. No, I would not let them bury me alive. I rose from the sofa, my legs steadier now, and walked to the study again. The safe loomed in the corner, its cold steel a reminder of the decision waiting. I opened it, touched the envelope, and whispered, "Not yet." Because deep inside, I knew the moment to reveal the truth had not yet come. Still, the weight of isolation pressed heavy. I wondered how many of you listening have faced the same silent war. Have you ever sat across from your own blood and realized their words of concern were chains in disguise? If it were you, would you cave to the comfort of surrender or fight even as the world believed you mad? Comment 1 if you'd fight. Hit like if you'd rather keep the peace. The house was silent again, but I knew silence was no ally. Silence was their weapon. They wanted me voiceless, erased. But today I would not give them that victory. The day of the will announcement arrived like the slow roll of thunder. From the moment I woke, the house felt alien, as though every wall leaned inward to watch me stumble. My scarf hid the raw scalp beneath, but I could still feel it sting with every shift of the fabric. I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual, not to admire, but to steel myself. I told my reflection, "You will not falter," though my chest trembled with doubt. By the time I entered the family hall, the air was already heavy with chatter. Relatives in polished suits, cousins with greedy eyes, aunts whispering behind manicured hands, they had all gathered as if waiting for the theater to begin. At the front, the long mahogany table gleamed under the chandelier stacks of folders, neatly arranged by the lawyer. I could feel their eyes turn toward me as I walked in. Some tilted their heads with sympathy, others smirked as though they'd already read the ending. And then she entered. My daughter-in-law, Sabrina, her heels clicking like hammers on the marble. She wore a pale dress, pristine, her hair a shining curtain. Her eyes swept the room with calculated confidence, and when they landed on me, a smile tugged at her lips, small and venomous. She carried a folder, slim but significant, tucked beneath her arm like a secret weapon. Behind her trailed my son, his face strained but obedient, his tie pulled too tight around his neck. The lawyer rose to greet me, his voice warm, respectful. "Mrs. Langford, we are ready when you are." But before I could sit, Sabrina's voice rang out smooth and cutting. "Actually, before we begin, there's a matter we must address, for the sake of transparency." She turned to the room with an expression of false concern, her voice pitched for maximum effect. "We all love Margaret, of course, but it would be irresponsible to proceed without ensuring she's well enough to make such monumental decisions. After all, we've all noticed changes. Forgetfulness. Confusion. This morning alone, she misplaced her purse 3 times. She looked at me as if I were a misbehaving child. My stomach twisted. I hadn't misplaced anything. She was inventing it whole. She continued pulling a sheet from her folder, which is why I've invited a professional to observe today's proceedings. For everyone's peace of mind. Gasps rippled through the room as a man in a gray suit stepped forward, a doctor, though not one I recognized. His eyes were cold, detached, as if he had already reached his conclusion. "This is Dr. Collins," she announced. "He specializes in competency evaluations. He'll simply watch, make sure everything is sound. Surely no one objects to protecting the integrity of the process." The silence was worse than shouting. I scanned the faces of relatives, saw nods, shrugs, eyes shifting away. They were complicit in their silence. My son kept his gaze low, refusing to meet mine. My throat tightened. I wanted to shout to demand they see the truth, but the weight of every eye bore down on me. My hands trembled against the table, and for a moment I feared they might be right. What if I did falter? What if I stumbled on a word, forgot a number, let my voice crack? Would the doctor seize it, mark it as evidence, and declare me incompetent on the spot? The lawyer tried to steady the air. Mrs. Langford is here to present her will. That alone is the purpose of this meeting. But Sabrina interrupted her tone sharper. Of course, and we want nothing more than fairness. If she's truly fit, she has nothing to fear. If not, then surely the law must step in. After all, it's our duty to protect her. Protect. That word again, sour and suffocating. My heart pounded, my breath shallow. The room felt like a courtroom, the chandelier above like a spotlight. I could sense their judgment already, an old woman trembling, clutching a scarf to hide a mutilated scalp. Weak, broken. I pressed my palms against the polished wood of the table, tried to steady myself, but my mind betrayed me, dragging me into the shadows of memory. Flashback. The night Robert died. The hospital corridor. The weight of the death certificate in my hands, my 12-year-old son asleep against my chest. I had felt powerless then, too, drowning in loss. I had sworn never to feel that helpless again, and yet here I was, cornered by my own blood. The doctor's voice broke the silence. "Mrs. Langford, may I ask you a few questions before we proceed?" His tone was clinical, already laden with suspicion. I stared at him, the words caught in my throat. The relatives leaned forward, hungry for a stumble, eager for proof. My scalp burned, my vision blurred. My hand shook as I reached for a glass of water, but the tremor betrayed me. The whispering began immediately like a rising tide. "See, she's shaking. Poor thing. Not in her right mind." Tears pricked my eyes. I felt the humiliations of months crash over me at once. The taunts, the pamphlets for senior homes, the whispers about forgetfulness, the mockery hidden in polite smiles. I wanted to shout, to pound the table, but my voice refused to rise. For a terrifying moment, I considered surrender. To stand up, admit defeat, let them declare me unfit, and retreat into whatever lonely corner they planned for me. The exhaustion pressed heavy on my shoulders. Perhaps peace, even humiliating peace, would be easier than this war. But then through the fog, I felt the sharp edge of something cold and metallic pressing into my palm. My ring. Robert's wedding band, which I had worn on a chain around my neck since the day he died. Its weight reminded me who I was, not the trembling figure they wanted, but the woman who had clawed her way through grief, built an empire from dust, raised a son alone. The woman who had promised never to break. I straightened slowly, my breath returning. "Doctor," I said softly, steadying my voice, "ask your questions. I'll answer." He blinked, perhaps surprised at the steel in my tone. He asked my name, my age, the date, the year. I answered each one clearly, firmly. He asked the value of a property I had acquired 20 years ago. I recited the number to the dollar, the date of purchase, the mortgage terms. Whispers turned to murmurs, faces shifted, a few raised eyebrows. But then Sabrina cut in her voice shrill. "Anyone can memorize details. That doesn't mean she understands what she's doing." Her words slashed through the room, and again the tide turned. Relatives shook their heads, muttered agreement. The pressure swelled once more. My strength flickered, waned. I lowered my eyes, stared at the wood grain of the table, and for the first time in years, felt the edge of despair. Maybe no matter how strong I stood, they would twist every word, every gesture. Maybe the battle was already lost. I clenched Robert's ring in my fist until the metal dug into my skin. The thought echoed like a whisper from the grave. Don't let them corner you. I looked up, forcing myself to breathe. For now, I would endure. But deep inside, the ember of defiance glowed hotter. This humiliation, this staged theater, would not be the end. It would be the spark. And so I ask you listening now, if you were forced into a room where your family tried to strip you of your very identity, would you bow your head and accept their version of you? Or would you hold your ground even if your voice shook? Comment 1 if you'd stand. Press like if you'd rather avoid the war. I didn't know how much longer I could keep the mask steady, but I knew one thing: this was not my downfall. This was the brink before the storm. The meeting ended with applause for no one. The relatives drifted out in clusters, whispering like crows. Some gave me sympathetic smiles, others avoided my gaze, but the damage was done. In their eyes, I had been marked. My scarf, my trembling hand, the doctor's presence, it had been enough to seed the rumor. The weight of their silence told me all I needed to know. They were waiting for me to collapse. When the last guest left and the door closed, the house sank into a silence so thick it pressed against my ears. I stayed at the table, fingers tracing the grain of the wood, my husband's ring burning in my palm. I could feel despair clawing at me again, but beneath it, something darker was stirring a current I hadn't let myself touch in years, rage sharpened into resolve. I rose, slowly walked to my study, and closed the door behind me. For a moment, I simply leaned against the heavy oak, eyes closed, breath shallow. Then I moved to the desk, pulled open the bottom drawer, and slid out a small black box. Inside lay a recorder, slim and ordinary, the kind you could buy at any electronics store. What no one in that room knew was that I had pressed it on this morning before the meeting began, slipped it into the folds of my scarf. It had captured every whisper, every insult, every word from Sabrina's mouth about my supposed incompetence. I pressed play. The device hissed, then her voice rang out clear, cold, certain. We've all noticed changes. Forgetfulness, confusion. This morning alone, she misplaced her purse 3 times. My chest clenched at the sound, but then my lips curled, because every word was a lie, and now I had her lies preserved in her own voice. I let the recording run longer. The doctor's measured questions, my answers steady and exact. The interruption, her shrill protest. Anyone can memorize details. That doesn't mean she understands what she's doing. The venom dripped undeniable damning. My hand tightened around the device. This was more than evidence. This was a weapon. But it wasn't enough. They would claim concern, insist their motives were pure. I needed something stronger, something that stripped away the mask completely. That was when my eyes fell on the second safe, the one built into the floor under the rug, a relic Robert had installed decades ago. Hardly anyone knew it existed. I knelt, peeled back the rug, and spun the dial. The lock clicked open, revealing a neat folder sealed in blue ribbon. Inside were the contingency papers Robert and I had drafted years ago, long before our son even met Sabrina. They were designed for one scenario betrayal. Robert had insisted on it. If our own blood ever tries to strip you of your rights, you need an escape hatch, he had said. I had argued, then accused him of paranoia, but I had signed the papers anyway. Now, holding them in my hands, I realized how prophetic he had been. These documents created an irrevocable trust, transferring control of key assets to a foundation in my name, assets untouchable by anyone else. All it required was my signature and the lawyer's confirmation. I sank into the chair, the weight of the folder on my lap, the recorder in my hand, and for the first time that day, a calm spread through me. Not relief, not joy, but clarity. I was not defenseless. I was not the frail woman they wanted me to be. I had weapons. I had Robert's foresight. I had my own memory sharper than they ever imagined. The clock ticked loudly in the silence, each beat like a drum in my chest. I thought of my son, his averted eyes, his silence, while she dismantled me in front of everyone. Did he realize he was walking into the trap she had set, or had he chosen comfort over conscience? That question cut deeper than any razor. But the truth no longer scared me. What scared me was silence. If I stayed silent, they would win. If I acted, even if the family shattered, at least the truth would stand. I rose again, moved to the window, and looked out at the darkening garden. The branches swayed in the wind like accusing fingers. I whispered into the night, "Robert, I hear you now. I will not let them corner me." I called Avery, the family lawyer. His voice was brisk, professional, but softened when he heard mine. "Margaret, are you all right?" "No," I said, steady, "but I will be. Come tonight. Bring the contingency papers you helped draft years ago and clear your schedule. We're rewriting everything." There was a pause, then a low whistle. I take it the whispers I heard at the meeting weren't exaggerated. "They're not whispers anymore," I said. "They're weapons, and I refuse to let them pierce me again." When I hung up, I set the phone down with hands that no longer trembled. I smoothed the folder on the desk, slid the recorder beside it, and exhaled slowly. The tide had shifted. Hours earlier, I had been humiliated, cornered, painted as a relic. Now I had evidence, I had allies, I had a plan. So I turned to you, listening to my confession. Tell me, if you were armed with proof of betrayal and the chance to strike back, would you use it, or would you hold back to preserve what little peace remained? Comment 1 if you would fight with everything you had. Hit like if you would keep quiet and pray for mercy. I cannot promise how tomorrow will unfold. I cannot promise who will still call me mother, who will still call me friend. But I can promise this: the storm that began with a shaved head will not end with my silence. I am no longer the victim. I am the fire they thought they had extinguished, and when the flames rise, they will be the ones scorched. That night, the house was too quiet, the kind of silence that amplifies every sound, the tick of the clock, the rustle of curtains, the faint creak of floorboards in the hall. I knew she was still awake. Sabrina. I could feel her presence like a shadow pressed against the walls, restless, confident, certain that her little performance with the doctor had sealed my fate. I waited until the hour was late enough that even the neighbors' windows had gone dark. Then I slipped from my study, the recorder warm in my hand. Her light was on. Through the thin crack under her door, I saw a faint, golden glow. I didn't knock. I opened it and stepped inside. She was seated at the vanity, brushing her hair in long, deliberate strokes, her reflection catching me in the mirror. For a heartbeat, surprise flashed across her face. Then just as quickly, it vanished. She smirked, set down the brush, and turned slightly on the stool. "Couldn't sleep, Margaret. Perhaps you're unsettled." Her tone was honey mixed with venom. My scarf slipped slightly as I stood there, revealing the raw skin of my scalp. Her eyes darted to it, and she smiled wider. "That look suits you, stripped of illusions, exactly how you should be remembered." The words stabbed, but I didn't flinch. I walked further into the room and closed the door behind me, the latch clicking like a lock on a cell. For the first time in weeks, I felt no tremor in my body, only focus. "You think you've won," I said quietly. "You think humiliation is victory, but you made a mistake." Her eyebrows arched. "And what mistake would that be?" I placed the recorder on the vanity table, pressed play. Her own voice filled the room, echoing off the walls. "We've all noticed changes, forgetfulness, confusion." This morning alone, she misplaced her purse 3 times. Her lips parted, but no sound came. I let it run longer until the moment when she hissed, "Anyone can memorize details. That doesn't mean she understands what she's doing." I pressed stop. The silence that followed was sharper than a scream. She laughed, brittle, forced. "So what a recording proves nothing. I was concerned for you. Any court would see that." I leaned closer, my voice low, steady, edged with steel. "No, Sabrina. Concern is gentle. Concern doesn't shave a woman's head in her sleep. Concern doesn't drug her water. Concern doesn't plant lies in doctors' ears. That's not concern. That's conspiracy." For the first time, her smile faltered. She tried to regain it, crossing her arms. "You can't prove any of that. It's your word against mine." I slid the second folder from under my arm and dropped it on the vanity. The blue ribbon slipped free, revealing Robert's contingency trust. Not just my word. These are legal documents drafted years before you ever joined this family. Irrevocable, untouchable. With one signature tonight, every property, every account, every business slips out of your reach. You thought today was your victory. It was the rehearsal. Tomorrow is the show. Her face drained of color. She reached for the papers, but I snapped them back before her fingers could touch. You clever old witch, she spat, her voice cracking with rage. You think this will save you? Michael is already on my side. The family believes me. You can parade your documents all you like, but when they look at you, she pointed to my scarf, her voice rising, they see weakness, madness, decay. Nothing you do will change that. My throat tightened, but I forced the words through steady and deliberate. They may see weakness tonight, but tomorrow they'll see the truth, and when they do, you'll have nothing. Not my home, not my company, not my son's loyalty. Only your own voice damning you. She rose abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor, and for a moment I thought she might strike me. Instead, she leaned close, her breath sharp against my face. You won't make it to tomorrow. The threat hung heavy in the air, pulsing between us. But I did not retreat. I met her eyes, held them until she blinked first. That's what you told yourself when you shaved my head, I whispered. But I'm still here, and stronger than ever. I turned, walked to the door, and paused with my hand on the knob. Tomorrow, Sabrina, the masks come off, and when they do, you'll wish you had left me in peace. I left her standing there, trembling, not with triumph, but with fear, her reflection fractured in the mirror behind her. When I returned to my room, I sat at the desk, placed the recorder beside the trust papers, and let the calm settle into my bones. The storm was close now. For weeks they had driven me into corners, whispered me into silence. But not anymore. Tonight the tide had shifted. Tonight the hunter had become the hunted. So I ask you, listening to me now, what would you do if you stood in front of the one who tried to erase you? Would you cower, beg for mercy, or would you place the truth in their hands like a blade? Comment one if you would fight face to face. Press like if you think silence is safer. I knew my answer. The war had just entered its final act. The next day dawned gray, the kind of sky that presses low like a lid over the city. I wrapped my scarf tight, not to hide, but to remind myself of the wound they had carved into me. Each sting on my scalp was a call to arms. I walked into the hall where the family gathered again, the air thick with perfume, ambition, and whispers. They were expecting a frail woman to stumble, to yield, to hand her life over. They had no idea they were walking into their own undoing. The lawyer called the meeting to order. My son sat stiffly at the far end, his hand resting uneasily on Sabrina's arm. She leaned close to him, whispering in his ear, her eyes darting toward me with that same poisonous smile. The doctor was there too, clipboard in hand, ready to pounce on any hesitation. The room bristled with anticipation. I rose, slowly steadying my hands on the table, and began in a low, calm voice. For 30 years I have built this family's fortune, brick by brick, paper by paper. I have endured storms, losses, grief, and betrayal. Today I came prepared to give generously, to secure futures, to keep peace. I paused, letting the silence stretch. But generosity is wasted on betrayal. A murmur rippled through the room. Sabrina's smile froze, but only for a heartbeat. She leaned forward, her tone syrupy and loud enough for everyone to hear. Margaret, please, don't embarrass yourself. We know it's been difficult for you lately. No one will blame you for stepping down. I turned my gaze on her, steady and unblinking. Embarrass myself? Let's see who truly stands exposed. I reached into my bag and drew out the small recorder. The red light blinked like an ember ready to ignite. I pressed play. Her voice filled the hall, sharp and unmistakable. We've all noticed changes, forgetfulness, confusion. This morning alone, she misplaced her purse 3 times. Gasps rose around the table. Eyes darted between her and me. I let the recording run further. The doctor's questions, my precise answers, her interruption shrill and damning. Anyone can memorize details. That doesn't mean she understands what she's doing. The murmurs swelled, people exchanging stunned looks. Sabrina shot to her feet, her face flushed. This is taken out of context. I was concerned for her. Concern. I cut in sharply, my voice ringing across the room. Does not shave a woman's head in her sleep. Concern does not drug her water. Concern does not ask doctors to sign false statements about her sanity. That is not concern. That is conspiracy. The hall erupted in gasps and cries. My son shifted uneasily, sweat breaking across his brow. He tried to speak, but his words tangled. "Mom, it's not like that. She just—" I pulled out the second folder, Robert's Contingency Trust, and dropped it onto the table. The blue ribbon unfurled the document, sliding free. "You thought this was your stage," I said, my voice low and steady, "but these papers were written long before you ever set foot in this house. Every major asset has already been secured in a trust, untouchable, irrevocable. Not a single dollar, not a single stone, not a single memory will pass into your hands." The room froze. The lawyer leaned forward, examined the documents, and nodded solemnly. "These are valid, witnessed, binding." My son went pale. Sabrina swayed as if struck, her lips moving but no words escaping. Then rage overtook her. "You manipulative hag. You think this changes anything. Michael is mine. The family believes me. You can't undo that." I looked at my son, my voice breaking yet firm. Michael listened to her. "Does that sound like concern, or does that sound like ambition? You once cried in my arms as a child, begged me never to let you be alone. And now you let her paint me as insane, let her strip me of dignity. Tell me, is this the man I raised?" His eyes brimmed with tears, his mouth opening, closing, no defense escaping. The silence of his failure was louder than any confession. The lawyer stood. "This matter is settled. Mrs. Langford retains full authority. The trust ensures her wishes cannot be overturned." Relatives erupted in chatter, some siding with me, others shaking their heads at Sabrina's audacity. Phones lifted, several had recorded the entire scene. The truth was no longer contained in this room. It was spilling outward, unstoppable. I gathered the papers and the recorder, then raised my voice one last time. "The greatest inheritance I can give is not money. It is this truth. Greed and betrayal will always collapse under their own weight. Remember that before you bow your heads to lies." The hall stood in stunned silence as I turned and walked toward the doors. Behind me, I heard Sabrina collapse into her chair, sobbing, mascara streaking down her face. My son muttered her name, but his voice broke into nothing. When I stepped outside, the cold air struck my face, bracing and clean. For the first time in months, my lungs filled without heaviness. The storm had broken, and I was still standing. So I ask you, listening to me now, if you held the power to expose betrayal in front of every witness, would you, or would you protect those who tried to erase you? Comment 1 if you would strike with the truth. Press like if you would bury it in silence. As for me, I chose the truth, and it set me free. The explosion in that hall should have ended the matter, but betrayal never dies quietly. It spreads like fire, leaping from wall to wall, devouring the illusions people cling to. That night, I thought I might finally rest. I had dropped the mask, revealed their lies, secured my legacy. But the truth has a way of refusing to stay within 4 walls. It marches into the street, into the mouths of neighbors, into the pages of newspapers, into the digital ether where nothing can be erased. The first spark came from the lawyer himself. Avery, ever the professional, had left the hall with the trust papers under his arm. By morning, a statement had already been drafted. For the record, the Langford estate remained secure, its matriarch fully competent, and all rumors to the contrary were false and malicious. He had not intended to leak it, but documents travel faster than intentions. Within hours, cousins were forwarding the news to their friends, who forwarded it further. By the time I finished my morning tea, half the city seemed to know that the Langfords had erupted in scandal at a will reading. I sat on the porch that afternoon, the autumn wind brushing over my bare scalp beneath the scarf. A neighbor crossed the street, Mrs. Whitmore, clutching her grocery bag. She paused at the gate, her face tight with hesitation. Then she spoke. "Margaret, I don't mean to intrude, but I want you to know. I heard what happened. People are talking." Her words tightened my chest, but before I could reply, she set her bag down and leaned closer. "They're not talking about you. They're talking about her, about how she tried to paint you as unstable, how she lied in front of everyone. I saw the video, Margaret. Half the neighborhood has. She humiliated herself. I blinked, the realization washing over me like cold water. Someone in the hall must have recorded the confrontation and posted it. Of course, in this age, secrets are fragile things. By evening, I saw it with my own eyes. A video on a neighbor's phone, Sabrina's voice echoing, sneering about my supposed incompetence, cut off by the sound of my recorder exposing her. The comments beneath were ruthless. Monster daughter-in-law. Imagine treating your mother-in-law like that. Shameful. The fire was spreading. The next day, the newspapers picked it up. Not the respectable financial sections, but the gossip columns, the ones that thrive on drama. Headlines screamed about betrayal, greed, and a matriarch who turned the tables with secret evidence. They printed grainy stills of Sabrina's twisted face mascara, streaking my son's pale profile beside her. Suddenly, the family that had tried to erase me was the one erased from society's good graces. Invitations withdrawn, partnerships questioned, neighbors whispering not about me but about them. And then came the witnesses I hadn't expected. Employees from the company I had founded decades ago began reaching out. One after another, they sent messages, left voicemails. Mrs. Langford, we always knew she wasn't right for this family. We've seen her belittle you in meetings. We'll stand with you if anyone questions your legacy. People I thought had long forgotten me stepped forward, their voices weaving into a chorus that drowned out hers. Even Helena, my quiet neighbor, who had first warned me, became a pillar. She spoke openly at gatherings, telling others about the questions Sabrina had asked at the clinic, the poisonous schemes she had whispered. Her testimony spread like branches feeding the flame. But the moment I knew the fire could no longer be contained came 2 nights later when I answered a knock at the door. On the porch stood Dr. Myers, my family physician, his face grim. He stepped inside, lowered his voice. "Margaret, I want you to hear it from me before you see it elsewhere." Sabrina approached other doctors. She tried to bribe one into writing a statement declaring you incompetent. He came to me this morning disgusted and said he couldn't stay silent. He's prepared to go public. He's ready to testify. I sat back, breath-catching. The conspiracy I had suspected was no longer whispers. It was evidence multiplying, undeniable. So you see, the truth was no longer my burden alone. It was a wildfire carried by witnesses, neighbors, professionals, even strangers online. What they had meant as my erasure had become their trial by fire. And I ask you listening now, if the people around you saw betrayal and had the choice to speak or to stay silent, what would you hope they'd do? Would you want them to protect the peace or to fan the flames of truth until the guilty stood exposed? Comment 1 if you believe the fire must spread. Press like if you think silence is safer. That week, Sabrina disappeared from public view. My son stopped returning calls. But the witnesses did not stop. Their voices carried farther than I ever could have carried my own. And for the first time in years, I felt something rare, something almost forgotten. I was not alone. The fire did not burn quietly. It consumed everything in its path. By the end of that week, Sabrina's name was whispered in tones of scandal across every circle she once longed to conquer. Friends who had fawned over her at parties stopped returning her calls. The boutiques that once offered her credit closed their doors. Even her own parents, humiliated by the headlines, withdrew to their estate, leaving her alone in the wreckage she had made. The professional fallout came swiftly. Dr. Collins, the so-called expert she paraded into the hall, faced an inquiry. His reputation, already fragile, shattered when evidence surfaced that he had been recommended by her, not the family lawyer. The medical board began its investigation, and his name was dragged through the same mud she had tried to bury me in. And my son, my Michael. He did not escape unscathed. The whispers about him were worse than about her. How could he betray his own mother, people asked in cafes, in offices, at boardrooms where I once walked with him as a boy? The business partners who had once respected him now looked at him with pity, even disgust. He came to me one evening, pale shoulders, hunched eyes, bloodshot. "Mom," he whispered, "I've lost everything. The deals, the friends, even her. She's gone." His voice broke on that last word, but I offered no comfort. Some lessons can only be learned in silence. As for Sabrina, the legal consequences followed the social ruin. With witnesses stepping forward, Dr. Myers, the neighbor, even staff who had overheard her venom, she could not escape. False medical claims, attempted fraud, conspiracy to defame each word, a chain binding her. I did not need to raise a hand. The law, once indifferent, turned its gaze upon her. And me, I did not emerge unscarred. Betrayal leaves marks no mirror can erase. I still wake some mornings reaching instinctively for the hair that is no longer there, feeling the sting of skin that remembers the blade. But I wake with clarity. My name is no longer in question. My authority no longer doubted. The family that once looked at me with suspicion now looks at me with awe, some with shame. I walk into meetings, into the streets, into church, and heads bow not because I am feared, but because I endured. I refuse to bend when bending would have been easier. The will stands, the trust holds, and my dignity, scarred but unbroken, shines brighter than before. So here is the truth of aftermath. They wanted me erased, and instead they erased themselves. They wanted me silenced, and instead their voices damned them. They wanted to strip me of respect, and instead they handed me more respect than I had ever commanded. And to you listening to me now, I ask, if betrayal found you in your own house, would you let it poison your silence, or would you endure the storm until justice arrived? Comment 1 if you would endure. Press like if you would still choose peace even at the cost of truth. As for me, I chose truth. And though it cost me my son's innocence, it gave me something greater, my freedom. Spring arrived late that year, as though the earth itself had hesitated before blooming. I remember the first morning I opened my curtains and saw the cherry trees outside my window, heavy with blossoms, pale pink petals, spilling across the street like confetti after a long forgotten parade. I reached up, touched my scalp, and felt the soft prickle of new growth. Not much, barely a shadow of hair, but enough to remind me that wounds do not remain wounds forever. They heal. They renew. I stood before the mirror, the same mirror that had reflected my humiliation months earlier. This time, I did not see a broken woman with a scarf covering shame. I saw a survivor, a matriarch with lines carved deep from battles, endured eyes brighter for having wept and then dried. The hair would come back, or maybe it wouldn't. But what had returned was far more important: my voice, my dignity, my will to define myself rather than let others define me. The house felt different now. Not a prison of whispers, but a sanctuary of quiet strength. I moved through each room, slowly touching the furniture, the photographs, the walls Robert and I had once painted together. For years, I thought I was living for my family alone, sacrificing piece after piece of myself to hold them close. But I see now love without respect is only a chain. And sometimes the greatest act of love for yourself, and even for those who betray you, is to cut that chain. Michael has not vanished completely from my life. He comes sometimes pale and thin eyes lowered. He does not ask for money anymore. He asks only to be seen, to be forgiven. I give him tea, a place to sit, a silence that is softer than it once was. But I do not bend. Forgiveness, yes. Dependence, never again. He will learn what it means to stand without leaning on me like a crutch. And maybe one day he will thank me for that. As for Sabrina, I no longer follow her story. She moved away after the scandal, trailing rumors of debt and disgrace. I feel neither joy nor hatred at her downfall. The harshest punishment was not mine to give, it was truth itself revealed in daylight, undeniable, echoing in her own voice, played before a room full of witnesses. That punishment is heavier than any revenge I could have designed. Some evenings I sit on the porch watching the horizon darken into the sea. The air tastes clean. The silence feels full instead of hollow. I hold Robert's ring in my hand, feel its familiar weight, and I whisper, I kept my promise. I did not let them corner me. And for the first time in decades, the promise doesn't feel like a burden. It feels like freedom. So here is my message to you listening to my story. Never let betrayal convince you that you are powerless. Never let the lies of others define the truth of who you are. They shaved my head thinking they had stripped me of dignity. Instead, they revealed the steel beneath my skin. They thought silence would keep me bound. Instead, I found a voice stronger than ever. Ask yourself, what is dignity worth to you? Would you surrender it to keep peace at your table, or would you endure the storm to reclaim it? If you've known betrayal, if you've been humiliated by the very people you fed and clothed, I hope you hear my voice and know this: you are not alone. Comment 1 if you believe dignity must always be defended. Press like if you agree that truth, though painful, is the only road to freedom. Because truth does hurt. It tore through my family like a blade. It left scars. But scars are proof that we survived. Scars are proof that we healed. And I would rather live scarred, but free, than whole, but chained. I end this story where it began with a mirror. But now when I look, I do not tremble. I smile. Because I see not a victim, not a woman defined by betrayal, but a survivor who dared to speak when silence was easier. My hair may grow back, or it may not. It no longer matters. What matters is that I stand, and I choose to stand tall. And to you, dear listener, who walked with me through this fire, thank you. Perhaps we will never meet in person, but in this moment, our hearts have touched. Carry this story with you, not as mine alone, but as yours too. Let it remind you that betrayal can wound, but it cannot erase. That dignity lost can be dignity regained, and that sometimes the greatest inheritance we can leave is not wealth or property, but courage. So I close with one final truth. They thought they had ended me. Instead, they awakened me, and I will never be silenced again.